And in three, two, one.
Good afternoon, folks. Dr. Jeffrey Smith here with my esteemed colleague, Jim Case. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you for asking.
Awesome.
We're going to do another deep dive into the realms of society's views on addiction, what it all is, perhaps how we've been looking at it all wrong, and some really exciting information with regard to how we could treat it better. And here's the big thing, maybe not go there at all. Wouldn't that be cool? So I'm really excited to share this information. It's something that is part and parcel to my practice multiple times a day, without exaggeration. Sometimes I find that many, maybe even half of my sessions involve, think about it for a second, a vice. And really, what is the difference between a vice and an addiction? That'd be a really good place to start. And please don't, please don't get ahead of me and turn off the podcast because you're not ready to take a look at your vices. Keep your vices if you want. This isn't a judgmental thing at all. It's simply an opportunity to really get a better idea regarding why we do what we do. Our mantra here, or our party line, is we're trying to look at the truth about things.
Yep.
So that would also include our own personal behaviors regarding what we put in our body, what we smoke, what we drink, obviously what we eat, what we listen to, what we watch, all these different sources of input are very interesting with regard to how they influence our life. Mm-hmm. Even the homes we live in, the type of electricity that we're around. There really isn't, I can't think of anything that we're doing in our modern society that's actually really good for us. And that's a bold statement that I just made. Our forms of transportation are not healthy. Previously, we've talked about the 60 hertz cycles that our electrical grid is based upon. Mm-hmm. And although if you think about the room you're sitting in right now, if you're in a building, you're in what would be like a piece of bread in a toaster. You've got all these wires running through the walls in this room you're sitting in. And this 60 hertz cycle is very efficient for getting energy from a power station to your house or to your workspace, but it's not healthy to the cellular entity that our bodies are made up of. And it's a form of radiation, and it's minimal exposure, but again, it's over and over and over again. And based on the varying degrees that we're exposed to, it really adds up. For example, if you have a bed like most people do where the headboard is near a wall, chances are there's a wire just on the other side of your head inside the wall, so you can't see it. So because you can't see it, you think it's not there. But with any kind of a low-grade multimeter, you could actually sense the electrons that are emitted from that wire right next to your head. And that's not healthy. So if you get anything out of this podcast today, if you have a bed without a headboard on it, get a headboard. If you don't have a headboard and you're waiting to get one, move your bed 6 inches away from the wall. And if I could do the demonstration right now, I would be happy to literally show you how the meter that I use goes from the little needle being in the red arc, which is unhealthy, and you move it 6 inches away from the wall next to where the wire is, and it goes back to a manageable amount. But what I'm talking about, the wires running from the wall, would be the receptacles that you plug your vacuum into or your alarm clock into or whatever. That wire runs from one of those to the other, and they're about bed high. And you've got all the lights running to all the light switches. So all these things are running through the wall. We got them running in the ceiling, and they're emitting electricity into our domiciles. And again, we're slowly but surely getting radiated, and it's not healthy for us. So that makes us more tired, and the whole thing is set in motion. That The water we're drinking has impurities in it. And if you drink in reverse osmosis water, that filters out all the minerals in the water. We need minerals. If you have cramps at all, it's because you're not getting the minerals. When you drink water that has been reverse osmosis filtered, water acts like a sponge and it attracts minerals to it. So what minerals you do have in your body, you're going to lose through the water you're drinking without minerals, and you're going to pee out the minerals that you need. I hope that made sense. We have minerals in our body, in our bones and inside that we've gotten from food and water that we've eaten. But when you drink reverse osmosis water, it has no minerals in it. So again, water acts like a sponge and it pulls minerals toward it. So if you're drinking reverse osmosis water all day long without putting minerals in it, you're actually depleting your body from necessary minerals. Even though you're hydrating it, you're depleting it from minerals, which leads to cramps. And it leads to brain fog and all kinds of things. So, okay, we've talked about where we sleep. We've talked about what we're drinking. And man, don't even get me started on the whole food thing, because we got that all backwards too and upside down. So the comment I made in the beginning of the podcast was there really isn't anything we're doing in our modern day lifestyle that's really healthy for us. I mean, all the stuff that's in the news about immunizations, and it's a requirement. If you want your kid to go to public school, you don't have a choice. You have to have them. This isn't me saying go get them. I'm just making a statement that it's some people don't even feel they have a choice to do that because they can't afford to put their kid in public or private school, and they don't feel it's a good idea to homeschool them. So they get their kid immunized and they go to public school. A lot of people believe that has something to do with our higher rates of autism now. And I'm not saying it does or it doesn't. It's just an interesting theory. So where the heck am I going with all this?
Good question.
Thank you, Jim. It's a great question. Where I'm going with all of this is, let's take a look at our modern day culture, our modern day lifestyle, and ask ourselves, why do we have all of the vices that we have? Why aren't we living in with healthy habits, free of the desire to smoke any kind of tobacco product and or an herb such as marijuana? And I'm not talking about once a year for your birthday. I'm talking about the regular use of it. Why do we want to drink alcohol as much as we do? And I'm talking about our culture, not maybe people that are more spiritual, but just don't take this message right now personally. I'm asking people to hear me talk about our culture at large. So what are some other vices? The amount of TV that we're watching, the addiction that some people have, or the vices that some people have, though, I've got to stay informed.
Well, let's clarify before we go on, because I looked up both words, and I didn't realize this, but the definition of a vice is immoral or wicked behavior. Criminal activities involving prostitution, pornography, well, it's vice. So a vice is a moral failing or a bad habit.
Okay.
So traditional examples of vices include alcohol, smoking, tobacco, gambling, but anything can be a vice as long as there's someone out there who views it as bad behavior or a moral weakness.
All right. Well, that's a rather harsh definition of a vice. What I would offer is anything that really isn't good for you that you're doing regularly that gives you a sense of, I like this makes me feel better, this is a reward for my hard work, but it just isn't good for you. So why are you doing it? That would be my definition of a vice. And little by little, these vices that started out as a reward or a treat we consume them in greater quantities, and in some cases it crosses the line and becomes an addiction. Mm-hmm. And just a decent, we're addicted to oxygen. So there are some things we're addicted to, like water. You have a drive and a crave and a natural desire to consume it. But oxygen and water don't take over your life in such a way that it becomes unmanageable. And that would really be, a better definition of an addiction, that you're doing something or consuming something that has gotten to a point where it's taking up so much time or so much energy, or it's keeping you from getting things done that you used to do, that it's become unmanageable. And it generally, I think we all could agree that untreated, they get worse, up to the point of it can take your life. Did we do okay with defining or clarifying as we're working through this issue?
Yeah, I'm just not real clear where we're going yet, so I'm not sure where to jump in. I would like to at least say it struck me, because we don't typically go this direction, but there seemed, when I say go this direction, the challenge of the topic is that there are many negative attributes to the topic. So just kind of clarifying that there isn't we're not attempting a negative tone in where we're going. We're just trying to create the picture of the stage that we're setting to be able to kind of peel back the layers of this process.
Yeah.
Because initially I was struggling a little at the beginning, because I'm like, what's with the fear thing? And I don't think you were probably coming from there, but I could hear it being easily interpreted, oh, we can't eat. Oh, we can't. Oh, and that's not a particular viewpoint I ascribe to either, only because we're human beings living in this planet dealing with what's here. So we need to be able to do that, looking at all of it realistically, but also realistically from the perspective of what can I really change and what do I need to make adjustment to find better ways to engage. So it's, that it's not, oh, you're drinking the water, you're going to die. Well, you're going to die anyway. You're drinking water that is as good as it can be, and there are ways to make water better for our bodies. We've been doing this for a long time, and so has everybody else. So we're not going to change the entire scope of the water program in this podcast. We're going to address issues of how negative habits or vices create a circumstance that takes us to a different place, which is more about the addiction.
Sure.
And where you're going there. So I felt like I needed to say that, because there was a lot of cacophony going on in my head about where are we going?
Well, if I was to try to pick a title for our podcast, it would be the truth about addiction. Yes. Or the truth about vices, or the truth about how difficult it is to live healthy in our modern society, something like that. Mm-hmm. And the path that I started with was just an awareness of how difficult it is to be happy, be healthy, be fit, be motivated in this modern day life that we're living. Because no matter where you turn to, you're going to have something unhealthy in your hand. And that's a reality of where we are right now. Unless you're living off the grid, which you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if that were the case. Mm-hmm. And my point isn't to alarm or invoke any fear. It's just, can we be honest that it is really, really difficult to make consistent, healthy choices so that our mind and body can be clear, so that we can practice conscious languaging, so that we can, in our meditations, in our prayers, in our contemplations, communicate with off-earth intelligence in the form of guardian angels or spirit guides or departed loved ones, or get downloads of wisdom as the universe gives it to us. And we don't think we have to get that, pay somebody else to give it to us or something. That's my heart's desire, is that people would want to live in that clean, clear way. I'm just saying, doggone it, it's really difficult. And I'm pointing out some of the challenges as to why it's so difficult. And, if we get some kind of grassroots efforts made that we want healthier options, who knows where this could go as far as we can easily shut down a store if what they're selling is not good for us and enough people just stop consuming it. So I know that's not the purpose of the podcast, but with a little bit of awareness and some energy behind it, change can take place, starting at an individual level and working up from there. Mm-hmm. So going back to the idea of addiction, the original data, the original model was based on rat studies. And in the original model, you had a rat in a cage, and it was a fairly small cage, say about this big. And there was a bottle of water, a little thing of food, and the next to the bottle of water was another bottle of water that had cocaine in one study and heroin in another study. And without exception, within 2 weeks, every rat sampled the drug water, sampled it again, and it eventually preferred the drug-infused water over the regular water, and within 2 weeks died. Every rat, every time. And that was the basis of, it must be the chemicals in this water, i.e. the drug, that created a tolerance, created an addiction to the point of unmanageability and eventual death. Years later, a doctor named Gabor Mate came along and he says, what if it's not the drug? What if it's the cage? And everybody went, what are you talking about? He goes, well, let's get a much bigger cage. Let's put some other rats in it. Let's have a place for them to nest, a little wheel to run on, a ball to push around, some pleasing light, a harmonious atmosphere. So they did that study. Same water, same drug-infused water. All the rats checked out both waters, but not one rat, one time, consumed it enough to create an addiction and or died, ever. So we go from every rat, every time, to not one rat, any time. Absolutely blew everybody's minds. I mean, it seems so basic, so simple now, looking back at it. So the idea that it's the cage, not the drug, is where we are today with our understanding of what constitutes addiction. Mm-hmm. So the primary kind of no-brainer was loneliness, isolation, withdrawal. And of course, those are all the things that happen when people start going down that path of I don't feel well, and I'm looking for Jack Daniels to make me feel better, or I'm looking for a little pick-me-upper so I do a line of Coke, or I'm hitting the bong, or whatever it is, that nobody ever starts down that path with the intention of winding up in prison or dead or on the street somewhere. It's gradual incremental changes with also the gradual incremental decrease in the quality of life and the pleasure of life. Pain, i.e. pain. And, that's one of the things that we use the word pain right now in the present society we're in right now. There's all this big to-do about all these people, well-meaning, decent, normal people that are all addicted to oxycodone and all of the other painkillers that are out there, fentanyl, Depakote, Dilaudid, Valium. Just amazing that, I've had some in my practice, and some of them were athletes and they had a significant injury. And with just the right amount of, I'm not on the team any longer, girlfriend left me, but you could see how the cage changed, which opened the door for this substance helps me feel better. And now I believe this substance is helping my life. And I'm actually creating an addiction to the idea that this makes my life better, far more than anything that's actually happening at the molecular level inside the body. So by the time people come to see me, they've gotten in trouble for doctor shopping, or again, they've had significant relationship issues. Yeah, they're in pain, but pain is actually manageable. Hypnosis can treat pain. There's many positive ways of treating pain other than pain pills. And we're still talking about addiction. And hopefully people that are listening to the podcast either have had the experience themselves or they know somebody, a well-meaning person that has had some trouble with painkillers, and just how quickly that can happen to what seems like take over your life. It makes you feel like you're okay in the cage that you're living in. And so I can't express that enough, that we really need to look at the cage with regard to interpersonal relationships. The podcast we did last week on having purpose. And without connection and without purpose, absolutely people will go 100% every time to the drug-infused whatever, and that will become their life. And it's a sad story that really ought not be. So are we still tracking together, Jim, that we're moving toward how could we sense that it's the cage, our lifestyle? That's why I started going down the path in the beginning of it takes little incremental changes along the way to get to the place where people are feeling really poorly and they don't want to go out and go to church any longer, or their meetups or their sanghas or any of the things that they used to do. And now they're staying home watching Netflix too much. They're not walking the dog any longer. And there's something that will help them feel better, even if it's ice cream.
Yeah, I think there's as you're talking, one of the things that really becomes obvious is that when what we and we've talked about this a lot. There is so much that we are entrained into from the beginning of our human experience, and I think what becomes the challenge in it is that part of that entrainment is an entrainment away from the intrinsic experience of who we are. And that has a profound impact when you become, when you're at a point in your life where you're unable or unwilling to see that basic kind of foundational place, because in part that entrainment is also about entraining into unworthiness, and that unworthiness is the foundation for all of it in a sense. But the reality of the addiction, of the lack of connection, sources, from my perspective, from an initial inability or unwillingness to start at personal inventory, meaning not assessing all of your bad parts, but assessing the state of the state,
Right.
and being willing to take an honest assessment of who am I in my own world? What am I in my own world? How am I in my own world? And beginning that evolutionary process of becoming and understanding that. But I think a lot of times people get, as your description was very good and very detailed. And I think it needs to really be understood that this is not something happening without. This is happening within. This is an internal process that, regardless of external circumstance, is still an internal process. So there still is a need to understand self consistently, however you do that, whether you start it through meditation, whether you start it through talking to somebody, whether you're, whatever it is. But that the addictive thing is, to me, you repeat the habit of unwillingness, if that makes sense. You're repeating whatever, when I say a habit of unwillingness, at some level, if your choice is to go to the addiction, then you're not choosing yourself. And why? Why don't you choose self? And how can any of us support, or you, as a doc, or me in my capacity, how can anyone help anyone else focus in that direction, get back to self? So this is an extraordinarily powerful topic and a very important one, because breaking down all of the stuff around addiction and around the how vices migrate to addiction and lack of connection and all that stuff is significant and important to really being able to break free of the cycle. Because the more you deny self, the stronger the addiction becomes. Don't care what it is.
So let,
But I use the word unwillingness very specifically because it is a conscious process. It is not an unconscious process. And unwillingness is an identification of, I'm consciously choosing, whether I understand it or not, I'm consciously choosing something other than self to understand my process, my life, my world. So there, 2 cents for what it's worth.
Yeah, I like this place that we're at right now with the choice, trying to simplify it of I'm choosing me or I'm choosing this, whatever this is.
Yeah.
And really want to try to break that down as to, because in the beginning, smoking a cigarette was a cool thing to do that you did with your friends in high school.
Yeah.
And then something happened along the way and you had a pack of smokes laying around and you picked them up and smoked it because you just got in a car wreck or your girlfriend broke up with you or something. And it's like, oh, this lets me feel just a little bit better in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year goes by and before you know it, you're now smoking cigarettes regularly. It was never the plan,
yep.
But it becomes something, and that's still not choosing yourself, because I don't think it's gotten to that point yet. Where it gets to the point of I'm not choosing me is like, I've got COPD now, or I'm coughing all the time. My breath is nasty. My clothes stink. Nobody wants to be around me. I smell like a freaking walking ashtray. And that's still not enough of a reason to choose self.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you think, this is a really fascinating discussion of is it in the first cigarette? Is it in the first incident where you're choosing? Because people aren't sophisticated enough to know. It's so subtle. It's so subtle that in that moment of choosing a substance or an activity like gambling or playing solitaire for 5 straight hours, whatever it is, I think it's so subtle that people are not seeing in that moment until we're bringing it up into a conscious awareness that, oh my gosh, you're right, guys, this is what I'm doing. I'm not choosing to love myself in this moment,
right,
by doing this other thing. But where does that really start? I'm not sure I have the answer to it, because we've never dove this deep into this topic before.
Well, I have some thoughts, and some of that is it's a couple things. I think one is the desire to be included. So we're back to this idea of community or connection. So if you think about any of the ones you eat, alcohol, cigarettes, we'll stick with those because those are the obvious ones. I can't think of anyone that I've ever known who tried either of those for the first, second, or third time that thought it was enjoyable.
Right? Oh, this is nasty.
Right. Doesn't taste good, doesn't feel good until the effect happens. So when the nicotine hits, if you get past the hacking and the coughing and the miserable feeling, you're going to feel a sense of more groundedness. That's real. That's the effect of nicotine on your nervous system. With booze, you have the same situation. But here's the deal. So the reason that we tend to push through is one of a couple reasons. One is because everybody else is doing it. I want to feel included. I want to be a part of these people that I think are important or significant. So I'm willing to put myself through this abuse, which is what it is.
I love it.
In order to be included. And so myelination, let's define that. Myelination, it's making new tracks in the brain. It's how we train ourselves. So if we train ourselves to subvert who we are to be better for someone else, that's pretty clear. That's a pretty straightforward picture. The second part, I think, is the continuation is just the Pavlovian experience. It's, oh, bell rang, I'm not feeling connected. This made me feel connected. Now, part of that is because in the warehouse of the brain, in the warehouse of the mind, there is a file that says, what happens when I feel disconnected? The brain says, oh, you feel disconnected here. You had a cigarette last time you felt disconnected. You had a drink the last time you felt disconnected. You took a line of Coke the last time and it helped. You felt better. And you go, that's true. I did. So here I am again, not feeling so connected. So maybe I should. So there is that crux of, let me step back a second, because what I keep hearing is it's important to recognize that yes, there are not great choices and better choices. But the reality is, if you think about your own life, there were many times when it felt like a choiceless choice. We weren't in a place in our lives that we had enough self-awareness to stop and go, wait a second. I do know a few people that I went through life with who, when you went to say, hey, here, take a hit of this, and they went, yeah, no, I don't like it. I don't want it. And they stood their ground and stayed in their space. And even though it was uncomfortable for them in the moment, they stuck with it and allowed themselves to either feel connected or not. But typically those people would not continue to hang out with the people who that was happening with.
Can you hold that thought for a second?
I can.
Those people who said no thank you, do you think it was because they had Jesus?
Potentially.
Okay, so that in itself
Mostly.
could also be another vice.
Oh yeah, yeah, just substitution. Yeah, their worthiness is structured in a different form.
Well, this belief that I have a connection to Jesus, I still have my connection, and I'm also not going to be a bad boy or bad girl.
Right.
I don't have to deal with that part.
Yeah.
So I've got this. Plus, I have maybe a moral code that could be based in fear. If I don't follow the rules, then man, I don't want to go to hell because I'm smoking cigarettes. Because I those are all my thoughts when I was a kid. I had this moral code that was well established based on, you got to be a good boy, and you don't, the alternative isn't even, conscionable of thinking about it. Or
right.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I just wanted to point out, for some people that have that, what seems like a solid structure to resist the peer pressure, could simply be another vice in some cases.
Well, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say in most cases, because it's all still driven off of the mass conscious process of entrainment, right? It's still all, you still haven't reached a point, the individual hasn't reached a point of complete self-awareness or some kind of self-awareness that enables them to observe what they're doing and go, wait a second, why would I do that? That doesn't serve the momentum of my life. It doesn't serve the direction I want to go. Because there's so many layers. And
right.
So it's not about it being daunting, but it is about being aware that you got to go below just that scratch on the surface part, because there are a lot of layers of that entrainment process that you still have to ask the same question. So just because you stop yourself from having that cigarette because you recognize that Jesus wouldn't like it, now you got to go back and go, Jesus, okay, let's talk about that. Let's look at that belief system. Again, not bad or wrong, just where are you putting your power and your focus? If Jesus is the reason, then it will show up somewhere else. Whatever that addictive quality is, whatever that need is, whatever that, the imaginary guy in the sky can only fulfill so much for so long before something else has to fill the space. Or you continue to be in denial and deny further and further and further, keeping your focus on this, I'm connected to God and to Jesus, while you've denied all the rest of your life.
Sure.
And that's not what either God or Jesus had intended for you or anyone else in the scheme of being human. So I know we're getting into lots of minutia, but I'm just bring it back around here to understanding that the source is we live in a world that's full of opportunities, and in a world, and we create a reality that's full of potentials and things to experience. And there's nothing wrong with experiencing any of it, as long as you're stepping into that experience in a conscious way. Because there's that old expression, how do you know what you don't want if you don't know what you do want? Or how do you know what you do want if you don't know what you don't want? So I'm not going to sit here and say, don't ever have a cigarette. That to me would be silly. I smoked cigarettes for years, and that process was invaluable to me on many levels. Was it healthy? No. And why did I stop? Because it wasn't healthy. But because I came to a place of recognizing that, is this thing going to be more important than this thing? And how do I shift that? And that's a process. That's a peeling of the layers, as we're talking about. It's not just, because I smoked probably my first cigarettes with my friends when I was in high school or whenever that was. I actually started smoking when I was right after I left home. Actually, not true. I started smoking before I left home because I found a carton of cigarettes under my bed. But my dad smoked for most of his life, actually until he quit later on. He quit later on in life, but so there was already that was there. I want to be accepted and emulate. And my parents used to laugh because I would make these things for my father on his birthday about not being a smoker and how great not being a smoker is, and how much I didn't do that. And, as a young person, to turn around 4 or 5 years later and there I was smoking away. But so I don't want to beat that. I don't want to beat that to death, but I'm just trying to emphasize the importance of, it's not a judgment thing. It's an awareness thing. It's not about you're bad and wrong because you're there. You're there because those are the choices you made. They're not good choices. They're just choices. They got you to where you are. Now, how are you going to re-engage yourself to get back to that center, to start peeling those layers off of you so that you can get back to that sense of who you are and be able to access that to say, yeah, no, whatever that was. And like for me with the cigarettes, it was, I'd have an urge and I'd say, yeah, no, we used to do that, but we don't do that anymore. And there was no judgment. There was no pushing. There was no fighting. There was no arguing. It was just, yeah, we did that, but we don't do that anymore. And it would instantly change the experience of the need. And then I was left with me again. And I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe I don't need that cigarette, but that need was stimulated by something. What was it? What was I looking for in that moment? That's where I'm talking about peeling it back, because something occurred in the environment that you went, oop, I'm not good enough right now. I need to connect right now. I'm not connected right now. Whatever the sentence is. And then stopping and going, oh, okay, that craving was intense. It's now past. What's in my environment, back to environment, what's in my cage that stimulated that desire? And now I'm going to hand it off.
Yeah. So I'm going to just piggyback right off of that. So we go back to these rat studies. The rats that were chosen for these studies, get this, Jim, they were healthy rats. They weren't abandoned. They didn't have mommy or daddy issues. They didn't not make the football team or get chosen not to be a cheerleader or whatever else in school that all of us got to experience and or watch or see or whatever. These were healthy rats, bred for rat studies, whatever that means. They were made for that environment. And within 2 weeks, the isolation took them out. It was the isolation, the drug worked. The drug absolutely made sense to them, made sense to their whole being to just keep doing this to the point of death. And for me today, I go to Costco and I watch all of these people my age that are 100 pounds heavier, 150 pounds heavier, and they have multiple vices. And this sounds judgmental. It's not meant to be. It's just an observation. People stay up way too late. They don't exercise. They're drinking crappy water. They're eating horrid food. They don't have a spiritual path they're on. They're no longer engaged. Their work isn't meaningful. And they're just literally like zombies waiting for their next meal and their next Netflix experience. That's what life has become. And, more on the woman's side, it would be, and I'm getting this from all my patients. I mean, I'm not just making this up. These are right. Clinical observations that I'm sharing. For the women, it's trying to stay up with all the social media interactions. And they don't, the funny thing is the social media connections, the virtual ones, is like eating cotton candy. It appears to have substance, but it really doesn't.
Yeah. Because
people aren't sharing their real lives on social media. It's just the glam, the bling, the look at the good stuff that I've got going on in my life, and it has no depth. So if we go back to these were healthy rats, this default decline to the point of death that happened so quickly were with healthy rats. And so if you go back to the high school thing now of you've got all these kids all starting in kindergarten, and by 12th grade, you've got the ones who use substances and the ones that don't. The ones that don't use substances found meaning in their art classes. They were on the drama club, the debate club. They had connection. They were on the football team. They played sports. They were connected in their groups going through, and they probably had a mom or dad that would talk to them about their day at some point when they got home, versus the kids that did use substances came from a broken home. I mean, it's just the classic stereotypical stuff that they didn't make the football team. They looked a little bit different. In some way they're the outliers that found a substance and then found a friend to participate in the substance with them. And over time, that just becomes a thing. And to the point of death, whether that's, yes, you said in the beginning of our podcast, we're all going to die. Yes, I understand that. But it would seem like, maybe you're taking a couple decades off your otherwise life without those substances.
So I need to clarify. I want to understand, because when you were talking about the different types of people, I would say, just because we come from basically the same generation, that when we were kids, that was true. There were paths. You were on a specific kind of path. I don't think those paths have altered. They've probably multiplied more than they've altered. But the usage pattern has radically altered, because there was some point where the transition took place where the greasers and the jocks doing different things. I mean, that wasn't what we called them in art, but that idea, I mean, I can see it in my head, but there was a point where that changed not only in the lexicon of the country, within the context of media and television, and suddenly it was the football jock who watched the nerdy guy or the greaser guy. They would hang out and drink and party and have a good time, started to feel like, wait, how come I can't do that too? And so, because as I understand it, like with the opioid epidemic, that's not relegated. That actually hits a lot of people, and people in those quote unquote safer groups. There really isn't any of that anymore. There's those contexts still exist, but the usage patterns, I think, have radically altered because of the breakdown of all of that connection.
Yeah. So great insight there, Jim. And you're definitely helping shape this, where I would like to say that most everybody, say by the time you're 35 plus, we've built our own cage. We've put ourselves in a cage again. And most people feel isolated, alone, misunderstood, not appreciated, not in love with life, not in love with themselves. And the thing is it's treatable. This is something that doesn't have to be this way.
Right.
And
So fixable.
you can see that I get really excited about knowing that there are ways to get out of the cage that we all build for ourselves.
Well, as we've been talking about, the cage we build for ourselves is all part of that unwillingness to engage self. All of the cage is typically all of the trappings of the entrainment process over the course of life, where my path was predetermined. My path was, or at least somewhat ordained by the significant others in my life, the parents, the grandparents, whatever, whoever was supplying that role, that that those things are, that cage that you're now at when you're in your mid 30s or whatever it is easily deconstructible, because it's all built on illusion.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's all built on made up shit. It's not built on some kind of indestructible steel. It's just belief systems that don't serve. And we just lose track of the fact that, wow, I'm not in this equation. I'm living a third of my father's desire, a quarter of my mother's wishes, 10% of my football coach's desires, and 30% of the priest is what makes up me. I'm like, wait a second, but you're not in that equation. you're just the regurgitator. So you've regurgitated a cage that you think is satisfying until you go, what is this? And why am I here? And why don't, like you said, it's all treatable. It's not a disease. It's disease, but it's not disease in the sense that, we're not looking at illness, we're looking at inattention.
Sure. So I recall several years ago looking at some studies that were done on the calcification of our pineal gland. For those unfamiliar, is what in the East they would call our third eye, or the part of our mind or brain that would allow us to have non-local perceptions, see, hear, and experience things outside of our own perceptions and awareness. And what's interesting is, in our present modern day society, there is proof through what do you do to somebody after they die? You cut them apart and look at them. We call that thank you. That's out of my consciousness, obviously, right? Through the autopsies of present day lifestyle, we are calcifying that gland in our mind from the water we drink, the food that we eat. It's our lifestyle is putting calcium, stuff that our bones are made of, around this tissue that makes it'd be like, a cataract over your eyeball. That's a really good analogy. That does not allow us to see, hear, and experience higher self, God, guardian angels, spirit guides, the Akashic records, all these different ways of looking at obtaining wisdom, that collective consciousness that you were talking about. Fascinating. And just that maybe that's where we could have started, but it wasn't available to me to start our podcast there, that modern day lifestyle is leading toward a calcification of the pineal gland that turns us only more toward the substances that created the calcification to begin with. So the snowball just turns and keeps getting bigger.
And also, I would actually, again, because my whole deal is about energy and how energy flows and works, is I think that even given the circumstances of the society in which we live with regard to the water and the food and the things that are available that are not necessarily the most healthy, if and when we make the choice to engage consciousness, and to really step fully into a conscious awareness of your own evolution and conscious expansion and all that stuff, as your vibration increases, I believe very strongly that that calcification begins to break down because it's vibrationally driven. So the calcification is the continual, and this is the classic idea of dumbing down.
Mm-hmm.
You're becoming so mired in the heavier vibrations that that gland cannot function because the vibrationally it can't get there from here. So it's like a um, it's not like an on-off switch. It's more like I'm trying to find the right analogy, but so if you think about the pituitary being this sort of beacon, this sort of, I want to say a receptor, but it's more than that because it is a connection point. It is an access point. So if you're not using it, if you're not engaged in it, it's going to, over time it's going to calcify. It's not going to do anything because it's like, it's not a muscle, but it certainly needs to be utilized. It needs to be engaged, and you need to engage your energy and continue to work those vibrations, because the higher you spin your vibration, the more activity gets created in that space, the more, again, you create that expansion. That can still happen even if you're not eating all the right foods all the time, and even if you're not drinking all the right things all the time. Will it have an impact on your ability? Absolutely. But it doesn't, it's all energy starting. So I can tell you from personal experience, the things that have shifted in my life because of the focus on energy. Natural organic shifts. You know, I had an organic shift from uh, eating gluten and eating the stuff that causes what, I know there's a word, but I can't remember the word for it, but it's been lumped into gluten. I think it's phosphatase or something. But anyway, um, that I know for an absolute certainty that the change in my consciousness and my vibration called upon me to make physical changes in my reality to support that energy.
Yes.
So you can go about it two directions. You can go about the direction of, I'm going to change this, but if it's not a change, no, there's no but. You can go there and you still have to do the work, and you can do the work and you can still get there. So it's not a one-way street in the sense that you have that ability. So that shift for me, like that was one shift. I had another shift with releasing meat. It wasn't oh gee, let me think about this, because I never wanted to. I was a heavy, healthy, hearty meat eater. Loved it, loved eating it, felt grounded eating it. I liked it. My body, on the other hand, as that expansion continued, said, yeah, but it's kind of in the way. So let's shift your chemistry so that it's no longer interesting. And that's exactly what happened. It was no longer interesting. So it wasn't a thing where I had to deny. It was a thing where I'm so fully engaged now with me that I'm aware of those signals, and I'm aware of those things that are showing up that are saying, hey, want to go further, consider this shift. But the shift is like, again, it's a choiceless choice, because you're like, oh my gosh, this expansion is so amazing and continues to be awesome, and I'm learning and I'm growing and things are going well, and this is an opportunity for it to go even bigger. I'm all in, because I've already had an amazing amount of experience with how powerful that shift is. They didn't happen simultaneously, and they didn't happen in the same year, actually, about 4 years apart. Um, but significant, because while I'm not, as you were talking about in the beginning, I'm not looking at every single label of every single thing I eat. I have a general and a very good sense of what serves and what doesn't. Fresh and living is usually pretty good. you know and sometimes I do things that aren't fresh and living because I enjoy them, and I recognize they have an impact, and that's still a choice, because I'm not yes, am I choosing me? Probably not in that moment, but I'm not choosing me every moment. I'm choosing, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to, I'm not going to say that it stays there and you're going to live in that forever and it's going to be great, because it's not
Right.
true. You still live in the world. You're still impacted by everything around you, so there's it's so many multiple layers, but again, it's you can go either direction. Focus on expanding your energy and let the energy do the work, or step into it because you might have the discipline that says, I'm going to do this, and you do it, and it helps you to create that expansion regardless of the direction.
Right. Toward the end of the 3-day conference that I attended about everything we know about addiction is wrong, Dr. Mate said his definition for sobriety wasn't the abstinence of a substance. He said the best definition he can think of is losing the interest in it. And that's what you just said.
That's awesome.
That it no longer has an energetic interest. I don't even think about it. Or if it's in front of me and I'm watching everybody else do it. I looked at a pizza last night. I was celebrating my son's 30th birthday, and they were all at a pizza bar with beer and everything. And I'm looking at this pizza, and I'm just like, there isn't anything in it or on it or about it that I am interested in.
Yeah.
I was hungry, but I didn't want that, which was, that's a big shift. I mean, because who doesn't like pizza, Mm-hmm. But in that moment, at that time, the interest wasn't there.
Yeah. Cool. Good example. And it does work that easily. It doesn't have to be and isn't necessary to be a hardship. The idea is not, again, I don't think we're here to create hardship. We create the hardship by the choices and the lack of attention. If you make different choices and you be in attention, then yeah, you confront things here and there, but they're not, it's a shift. It's not oh my God, I have to sacrifice, that comes if you've chosen to ignore for a long, like you were saying earlier, if it gets to a point where you've now produced something on the physical level in the way of disease, in the way of atrophy, in the way of whatever, yeah, you've gone too far in the ignoring self process. That's a different animal. But up until then, you have every ability to create change organically and easily. And it isn't saying you can't come back from the other, but I'm just saying there is a point that, in my experience, when you ignore the energy long enough and then there is a manifestation, you're a little more challenged because now you have to deal with the manifestation.
Agreed.
Whatever that particular thing is.
What I'm recognizing in people that I'm working with that have habitually chosen something else rather than choosing themselves, they just start stacking one vice on top of another, on top of another. Before you know it, they're doing all of them. And none of them work. They're still in the same darn place, which is, I don't love me. But now they make it so darn hard to turn that bus around.
Yep.
Because it's like, okay, now they have a heart condition, so all they can do is swim. But they have a skin condition and they're allergic to chlorine. So it's like, where do you start? And where you can start would be, okay, well, you could juice, you could do that, and you could meditate, and you could start there. And through the combination, what's that?
You can breathe.
Oh yeah, breathe. Another awesome intervention.
Exactly, because you can stimulate and activate the vagus nerve in less than 5 minutes, which is going to stimulate an altered state, and away you go. May only last for a minute, may last for 10 seconds the first little while, but it's going to be that shift. And to your point, I think what's absolutely fascinating from the human experience is that you can be in that place where you stacked all your vices in and you're just rifling through them left and right, in order to feel good. The illusion is that it's big and it's hard and it's difficult, because the amount of energy you had to use to build that habit is tough. It's not like anything else. I mean, I'm thinking about Michael, he worked for a company for 18 years. That habit doesn't go away because he doesn't work there anymore. It's 18 years of a habit of thought, a habit of behavior, a habit of belief, a habit of how things are because of that experience, because of that cage that doesn't go away in a day or a week. It takes time and focus and a conscious accounting of noticing how you're responding to things or acting within things or being involved with people or not being involved with people. There's a lot there. And it's not insurmountable, and it's not so big. It only looks that way from the side you're looking from. You're looking at it from the amount of time it took you to build those belief systems. You're not looking at it from the perspective of what it would be like without them.
Right.
Big difference in perspective.
I'm throughout our podcast, I've had a couple of hits come to me regarding the traditional way people attempt to move out of an addiction, and that would be to join some kind of a 12-step program specific to the addiction. And without it sounding like I'm dissing it or, bad-mouthing the program, the requirement to participate in the program is I am an alcoholic, or I'm a food addict, or I'm a narcotics addict. You have to always identify yourself as that in order to participate in the group. Like 25 years later, people are still saying, "Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm an alcoholic." Like you haven't had a damn drop in alcohol for 25 effing years. What do you mean you're an alcoholic? That makes no sense. But that's the language that has to be spoken in order for what?
Community.
Yes.
Connection.
Yes.
I have a good friend who has been sober for 30 plus years, I'm sure. And I've never one time heard him refer to himself as an alcoholic. I've only ever heard him say, "I've been sober for 30 years, I don't do alcohol." It's never a question of that's my identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, this is my preference. This is my choice. I don't engage. And he has absolutely no issues with it. He doesn't. His girlfriend is quite the consumer, and he's the DD. He handles it.
Mm-hmm.
Parts of it he has to handle a little differently because, if she gets too much, he has to separate himself for for a night maybe, because he has sensitivity to the smells and to the things that that can trigger. But none of it. It's just the point was. Not self-identification as this is who I am. And sometimes, I don't see that there is the negative aspect of that is that I think it's important sometimes to identify initially, because part of the addictive process is pretending it isn't there.
Yeah.
So
break through denial.
Yeah. So taking on the ownership of that initially, I think is important, that I have been an alcoholic and that's not my choice any longer.
Yeah.
That would be a cool way to actually, "Hi, my name is so-and-so and I've been an alcoholic," as a way of identifying something that has occurred in the past, but focusing in a new way into the future. But
so get this, Jim, remember Dr. Mate's definition was, I no longer have interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
So people wouldn't need to keep going to meetings in order to not drink if they no longer had interest in it. So none of those people are really sober by Dr. Mate's definition.
Right.
Because they're looped into this is my tribe now. This is my community.
You're an alcoholic who doesn't drink. You're an alcoholic who's not had a drink. That means you're an alcoholic.
And we call that a dry drunk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't dealt with all of the layers of the entrainment process and the choices that you made as a result of that, yes, you're a dry drunk. And again, it's not a judgmental stance. This is how energy works. It's about language. It's about how you focus your intention and your language, and how you use that has a lot to do with how successful you can be at making these transitions.
Yeah. So the people that I know that have been in the 12-step community, because again, the last thing I would want is for anybody to be offended by what we're talking about as if that's a bad community to belong to.
Right.
The people that I know that have benefited from being in that community, they outgrew it because they started eating clean. They started exercising. They literally started taking care of their body. They didn't just stop drinking and start pounding coffee. and hanging out at the donut bar and ballooned
Smoking
up.
cigarettes.
And cigarettes, yes. Nicotine, caffeine, and sugar are the replacements for the alcohol. Is that a better choice? Well, yeah, you're not going to be in prison for manslaughter for, drunk driving and all that sort of thing. Yeah, it's a better choice. But did you really change anything?
No. Is that the cage you want to stay in?
Yeah.
Because now you've created a new cage. Now you got to decide if this cage, and it may be, and for many, that particular environment, that particular cage is necessary for a period of time, because that's where the self-awareness process begins, because there's so many good things in the 12 steps that bring you to that awareness of self and the separation that you've created with self, that it may take that environment for you to become aware enough to then stand on your own 2 feet. The challenge that I find is that in many cases, especially with AA and NA and things like that, the entrainment process is, if you're not going to meetings, you're not going to be successful. If you're not showing up and doing your meetings, then you will eventually go off the wagon. You're going to fall off the wagon. But that's something that is stated as fact, and so that I struggle with that particular aspect for the very reason that we're having this conversation, which is, yeah, that can be true. That can be true if you're not doing the work. That can be true if you're not into self and are not choosing self in that capacity.
Right.
Now, go ahead.
What we're talking about right now is the philosophy of once an addict, always an addict.
No.
And it sounds to me like you and I are in agreement that neither of us own that or want to be around that type of mentality.
Yeah, I think it's the same. I had the same experience when I went through cancer 10 years ago. It was probably 2 or 3 years after treatment, and things were fine, and I was fine, and I realized that I never talked about it. And I would be, and this was when I was still living in Arizona, and something would come up that would remind me, or that I would go, oh yeah, I did that. I had to go through that. I had cancer and went through chemo and radiation and did all that whole thing, and then sat back and went, I had completely forgotten about that. I mean, literally, because it wasn't, but I also noticed it because I couldn't self-identify. I couldn't do cancer walks. I couldn't get myself to go to those or get involved in any of that, because it was like, wait, in order to do that, I have to be identifying as a cancer victim. And that's unacceptable. That's not who I am. And it's not who I choose to be. It isn't that there's anything wrong with it. Again, you got to remember, each of these things is a new level of entrainment. It's a new level of what you're training yourself to believe about who you are. So if you need a support group, that's amazing, and utilize it and nourish it and really, really get what you need to. But remember, in the end, you are not cancer. You are not alcohol. You are not Coke. You are not any of those. You are an extraordinary being that made some choices based on history and whatever else is going on there, that now you get to look at some different choices and use the tools that you need, use them successfully, find the right tools so that you're finding that connection to self. You're finding that relationship, which is allowing you to connect more deeply with other people, which is where I think this is all leading anyway, which is about the idea of connection. And that we'll choose those things, those groups, those atmospheres, because in the moment of our in the moment of our assessment of our weakness or our vice or our addiction, we find a community that helps us better understand who we are and what that addiction is about. But the evolution of that is still a spiral. You got to walk away at some point, because you got to be able to walk on your own. You got to be able to stand on your own. It doesn't mean you can't reach back for help, but at some point, self has to become the driving force.
Right.
And I hope that didn't sound in any way judgmental, because it totally was not meant, is not.
Right. So if we could visit the rat study one more time. Absolutely. There was a third group that I haven't mentioned yet. I was saving it for the end. And that's a group that, so now they've got two experiments going on. that have both been duplicated numerous times to validate the outcomes. So the third group that they had was a rat that instead of going 14 days, they left it in the cage 7 days by itself to the point where it was choosing the drug-infused water all the time. They put that rat in the group that had the good life of purpose, connection, ability to reproduce, access to food, that sort of thing. It still chose the drug-infused water for a period of time, but it eventually rehabilitated itself. It auto-adjusted, it self-corrected by being introduced back into a community.
That's awesome. Love that.
So that would be really the solution that we're talking about, is if you're looking forward to going to Costco as like the highlight of your week, so you can load up the shopping cart with all the tasty treats and snacks and candies and the good stuff in there, and you're going to go home and Netflix and chill. Oh man, because that's what people do, man. It sounds like I'm making fun of it, but it's almost like I'm laughing, because otherwise I'd be crying, because that is what people do. They don't live in Colorado and get out and hike, and they're not surfing and biking and walking and talking and meeting and reading and doing these life-giving, purposeful activities, primarily built around finding common interests with people who have purpose and who are trying to make a difference and want to live healthy and clean and aware and alive. And I'm hoping that this at least provokes somebody to say, okay, I'm not going to do that as much. I'll make the transition. I'll find a meetup. I'll join a Sangha. I'll find a group of people who I can connect with who are really wanting to live a cleaner, more purpose-filled, aware, connected life.
Yep. And keeping dialed into your own experience enough to recognize that that's going to evolve and change as well. That as you pick groups, you're going to pick groups typically that are vibrationally harmonious with where you think you are. Well, once you're there, once you experience that, you're going to come to a place of expansion, and you should.
Yes.
You should, because that's never going to be the end result. The journey is never over. So you want to be aware that, yeah, there's going to be, maybe that initial group, you find one, maybe two people that you deeply connect with. So you keep that connection and you move on to the next group that you feel like that's going to satisfy what you're looking for. But that's only going to come because your connection to self becomes more established, more clear, and you're allowing that internal mechanism to guide you, that decalcifying pituitary that's amplifying and connecting is saying, let's go over here, because over here is your next is the place to take you to the next level. Let's go, and so it's that self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you trust it, the more you go with it, the stronger it gets, the clearer it gets, and the healthier and more clear you become over time. But it's also about being patient and recognizing you're peeling back layers. So give yourself permission and time to do that. Give yourself permission and time to walk that. If you're discovering this at 35 years old, you've had 34 3/4 years of behavior that you've been enacting that's not going to go away in a week. It's going to change in a week, and it's going to get better in the second week, and it's going to get better. It's going to evolve. That's where, by being attuned to self, you become aware of those incremental changes, and those become satisfying, and those become enlivening and begin to direct you to the thriving that you're looking for.
Right. Well, as we have moved as a society away from our connection with nature, and we've moved indoors, and we've gone more synthetic or man-made in pursuit of comfort and luxury, we have truly lost our way, in my opinion. The original model of outdoor living and outdoor interaction and movement through work, we've truly lost that, and our brains were designed for drinking out of streams and growing, picking wild berries and listening to the flutter of a bird fly by and hearing buzzing bees and not jackhammers and trash trucks. We've just moved so far away from how this, both physically, chemically, energetically, and spiritually, there's a direct correlation. People who are really in tune with the earth and in tune with nature, they have a pretty darn neat spiritual life as well. Mm-hmm. And the more that we live in tall buildings with concrete walls and lots of wires running through them, and we're eating our foods out of packages and cans, and we lose our spiritual path as well. And we're kind of dying a little bit each day. It just becomes a grind. So the original model is a pretty good model, and it's not rocket science. And a gradual return to that, or an inclusion of that. If people could take, an hour less Netflix and go walk in the city park, or go find, everybody lives somewhere, and there's something about nature near someone somewhere. Yeah. And going and being willing to find that, and just little by little recognizing there's an energetic change that happens, that maybe I don't smoke my cigarette there, or my cigar, or I don't feel like I got to put 2 cookies in a baggie and take it with me, or even a piece of chewing gum. Just giving up a piece of chewing gum in place of sitting at the park, listening to the bees buzz and a butterfly go by and a squirrel climb up a tree, and noticing a cloud fly over. If you really notice that, it feels pretty darn good.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge the importance of the incremental aspect, is that there's no place where the incremental choice is a bad choice. Meaning it's not all or nothing. You got where you were incrementally.
Yes.
You can unget where you are incrementally. It's not saying you can't make some quantum change, and quantum change can be really powerful, but many are not prepared for quantum change, because that quantum change can lead you back into the old loop because you don't know how to deal with the new life. And so it's important twofold. If you have the quantum change, then seek the help for understanding how to live in that new quantum experience from a different from different people. But otherwise, it's going to be incremental. And yes, there will be times when that quantum experience will take place simply because you've relieved enough layers of the entrainment process that your energy has an ability to make a jump that you didn't have an ability to do before. The important part of that is allow the jump, allow the newness, but make sure your support system is structured so that you can get direction about how to continue walking in that new vibration, so that you aren't looking back in history and dragging your energy back down to what you knew, because you don't know what you know now. And you certainly don't know how to be in the new now because you haven't been here before. So now that you're here, give yourself permission to find out what you don't know.
Nice.
So those are, I think we are about at that point.
I agree.
We got deeply in the pond today. This is fantastic.
Nice work.
Yes. You want to close us out, or?
I think we've been doing that for the last couple minutes. I don't know that I have anything additional to share. Just encourage. I want this to be a message of encouragement, of just awareness that our modern day life, there really isn't anything positive about it, including the comfort that we've created. Comfort is actually not a good thing.
And we'll end it on that thought. Contemplate that. Contemplate that. Thank you all very much out there who are listening to our podcast and who are engaging with us. We appreciate you. We appreciate your focus and time with us. We hope that we continue to provide really valuable and insightful things that can lead you to beginning to unravel some of that entrainment in your own experience. Excuse me. Please look us up if you want to listen to us, and check out our website. We're at www.adventuresintruthpodcast.com. We also have a YouTube page for Adventures in Truth Podcast. We're on Deezer, we're on iTunes, we're everywhere. So come find us. If you want to see us in action, YouTube page. If you just want to listen, hit our website. Thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to the next amazing adventure in truth. Jeff, always good hanging out with you.
Likewise, Jim.
And we'll see you soon. Get ready to dive
Alrighty.
in for the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.